The secret of Trump's power. What makes a man hated by millions and yet idolized by so many others? How can someone lose the most powerful office in the world and still remain the center of global attention? This is the paradox of Trump. The man who understood something few understand. Canis not on the throne. It is in people's minds. While many underestimated him, he intuitively studied the codes of influence and the manipulation, emotional factors that govern human behavior. Some say his rise was luck. Others swear it was strategy. But behind the scenes, what you saw was an experienced player, moving pieces with surgical precision, while everyone thought he was just reacting. The media. She believed she controlled him, but he turned her into his megaphone. Her mistakes? Part of the script. Her provocations? Tools of control. And every word she spoke, even the most controversial, seemed calculated to arouse anger or devotion. Perhaps the real secret of Canis, not about convincing people, but about making them believe they came to the conclusion on their own. That's how you create a narrativable to survive time, politics, and logic. And if you think this is all just about Trump, you might not have realized it yet. The game of influence, it happens every day. And you're part of it too. The beginning of an unlikely figure. No one imagined that a man accustomed to the business and television spotlight would become the epicenter of a global political movement. Trump has always understood something that many underestimate: Canis born of perception. He not only built skyscrapers, but also erected a narrative about himself. As a winner, as someone outside the system, capable of challenging everything and everyone. While others tried to adapt to politics, he turned every mistake into a spectacle and every criticism into fuel. It was the beginning of influence that mixed audacity with an almost theatrical magnetism. Behind the scenes, there was more than just fiery speeches and catchphrases. There was a strategy thorough, dominate attention. Trump understood that, in the age of media, whoever controls the attention controls the game. He did this intuitively, like a conductor directing chaos, exaggerating, provoking, smiling when everyone expected him to back down. His leadership was not conventional. It was emotional. And by manipulating emotions, he manipulated narratives. The psychology of masses became their invisible ally. But none of this would have worked without one essential ingredient: charisma. There's something almost hypnotic about someone who blindly believes in themselves. Trump didn't just sell ideas, he sold confidence. The public didn't see a politician, they saw a movie character, and that made him irresistible. His con was, not in office, but in influence that it exerted over minds and hearts. Yet behind the show, something deeper was at work. An emotional and communicational engineering that would redefine the way power is exercised in the 21st century. The engineering of influence. There are those who believe that influence is a gift, but in reality, it's engineering. Trump understood early on that people don't follow the most prepared, but the most confident. Behind every seemingly improvised speech was a strategy of psychology: social, repeat, simplify, and emote. While his opponents used technical jargon, he used short, direct, almost childish sentences. The kind of language that passes through the screen and settles in the subconscious. It was the manipulation, emotional disguised as authenticity. Behind the scenes, the team studied each audience reaction like a scientist observing an experiment. They tested words, tones of voice, gestures, until they discovered which triggers sparked anger or hope. And that's where the Canis born, when someone understands what moves people and learns to speak their language exactly. The secret was not in sounding political, but in sounding human. And ironically, it was this narrative of imperfection that made him invincible. He didn't sell promises, he sold belonging. He made the public feel that by supporting him, they were challenging the system, being part of something bigger. That's leadership in its purest form, not imposing ideas, but having people defend them for you. Your media, it wasn't television, but every mind was conquered. And while everyone was trying to understand their charisma, few realized that the real strategy was in something deeper, an invisible web of influence that would only be revealed in the next chapter of Behind the Scenes of Power. The invisible power behind the scenes. Behind the scenes, the real Canis rarely seen. It is felt. While cameras captured fiery speeches and provocative tweets, a silent network operated behind the scenes. Data analysts, image strategists, and unseen advisors calculated every move. What seemed improvised was often the result of a strategy surgical, shaped by psychology of masses, and sustained by millions of micro-decisions. The stage was just the reflection of something much larger, an engineering of influence designed to dominate the global board. Trump understood that a leader is only strong when surrounded by the right minds. And it's curious how charisma can open doors that knowledge never could. Behind the unpredictable persona was a web of alliances with billionaires, lobbyists, and experts in media digital, all committed to transforming each appearance into a spectacle. The narrative was not created by one man, but by an entire system that knew how to manipulate emotions on a global scale. And, like a hidden maestro, he ruled this chaos with a calculated smile. This is the true essence of leadership modern. Understanding that the stage is a distraction, and that the real game takes place in the dark. Every scandal served as a distraction from a strategic move. Every controversy, a test of reaction. After all, it's not about what's shown, but about what's controlled without being seen. And while the public reacted, the machine kept turning, preparing the ground for the next phase. When manipulation would stop being a tool and become a refined art. Manipulation as art and strategy. Manipulation isn't lying, it's understanding how human beings think. Trump elevated this until at the level of strategy, understanding that people do not act by logic, but by emotion. He studied, even if intuitively, the fundamentals of psychology social, creating common enemies, offering unlikely heroes, and turning every obstacle into a personal battle. That's why the public saw him as one of us, even though he was a billionaire. This reversal of perception is the pinnacle of influence. While the media criticized him, he used it as a megaphone. Every negative headline was turned into fuel to reinforce his narrative of a victim of the system. This play of light and shadow is the essence of manipulation, making the opponent work to his advantage. A classic example? When called crazy, he would respond with irony, laughing at himself. And suddenly, the insult became a trademark. It was charisma mixed with calculus, disguised as spontaneity. A leadership his was not just about ordering, but about inspiring action through emotion. He knew that when a person feels something deeply, anger, hope, fear, or pride, they become loyal. And that's when control solidifies. Strategy Trump's goal wasn't to dominate politics, but to dominate the collective imagination. Because whoever controls emotions controls the world. And as this polarization grew, something even more dangerous was born. A global machine influence that would transcend borders, ideologies, and continents. The global polarization machine, Trump's speech transcended the borders of the United States and spread as a cultural phenomenon. His speech, filled with emotion and defiance, resonated in nations that felt forgotten or wronged. Charisma of the man who speaks his mind inspired leaders in several countries, ushering in an era in which confrontation became strategy. It was the export of a new form of a model of leadership that did not seek consensus, but control. Us behind the scenes, this polarization was not an accident. It was a strategy. Division is the most efficient form of domination. When society fragments, whoever holds the microphone holds the can. A media, fascinated and at the same time outraged, amplified every phrase, every gesture, transforming the politician into a modern myth. While some saw him as a threat, others venerated him as a savior. And in this duality, manipulation became invisible because each side believed they were right. The world has entered a new war, the war of narratives. Countries began to copy the direct, emotional, and disruptive communication model, where the psychology of the masses replaced dialogue. It was no longer about facts, but about sensations. The influence digital shaped opinions faster than any army could march. And behind this global curtain, an empire of can sustained by clicks, likes, and emotions, setting the stage for the next act, the rise of the narrative empire. The empire of narratives. In a world where truth has become malleable, who controls then narrative holds? The Khan. Trump understood this like few others. He understood that media's not just an information channel, it is a psychological battlefield. Every headline, every post, every comment fueled the influence that expanded like fire in dry straw. In the behind the scenes, strategists knew that controversy captures more attention than reason, and so they created an empire where scandal was worth more than coherence. This dynamic transformed the manipulation in a show. The audience was no longer looking for facts, they were looking for emotion. The psychology of the masses was programmed to react, not to reflect. The leadership based on virtue gave way to leadership based on presence. The more you appeared, the more you existed. It's the paradox of the digital age. The more you talk about freedom, the easier it is to be led. And Trump, with his charisma and theatrical sense, he surfed this turbulent sea like someone born to master the currents. But the real game wasn't between politicians and journalists. It was between strategy and distraction. The empire of narratives does not depend on a single voice, but on millions of voices repeating the same ideas without realizing it. And while everyone discussed who was right or wrong, the tray was moved silently in the behind the scenes. That's where the can reveals its most subtle face. Not that of the one who shouts, but that of the one who makes the world believe. And at the heart of this illusion, the true secret of power was hidden. The secret of power. Thekan truth is never what you see. It's what you feel. It's not born of position or fortune, but of the ability to move minds and emotions without them noticing. Trump understood that control over psychology collective is worth more than any army. The influence. It's a seed planted in people's unconscious, and those who learn to cultivate it govern even when they seem silent. The secret lies in transforming perception into reality, and that's something few master. Behind the show and the media, there was something deeper, an understanding of how narrative creates worlds. The strategy wasn't just about winning elections, but about remaining in the collective imagination, generating debate, emotion, and loyalty. That's why, even outside of formal power, he still sets the pace of global conversation. His leadership transcended his position and became an archetype, that of the man who defies everything, the symbol of resistance to the system. This is charisma converted into legacy. But the great paradox is that all manipulation carries the risk of imprisoning those who practice it. When someone dominates the world's attention, they also become hostage to it. It is the price of can. The more you have, the less free you are. Way behind the scenes, throughout history, there is always an invisible balance between control and surrender. And it is at this point that the secret of power is revealed. Not in dominating others, but in dominating oneself. Because whoever learns to influence their own inner selves transforms the world around them. The mirror of power. In the end, the cant that we so admire or fear in figures like Trump is just a reflection of what already exists within us. Every person carries to some degree the desire to influence, to be heard, to move the world in your own way. The difference is in how we use it. Some choose a strategy, others toe manipulation. But the principle is the same. Understanding the psychology human and learn to lead, starting with yourself. What if the real secret of Canis not about winning over crowds, but about mastering one's own emotions? If the leadership, what's more transformative isn't on stage, but in the moments when you choose self-control over reaction. Trump's story is, at its core, a mirror. It shows how easily we are moved by narratives, and how free we can be when we begin to recognize them. Now I ask you, who is writing yours? Narrative, have you, or someone else, learned to manipulate your focus? If this content made you think, if it provoked you in some way, it's because knowledge does its job. It awakens. So seize this moment, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and keep exploring the behind the scenes of power, the human mind, and everything that most people still don't have the courage to question. The game has only just begun.